Podcasting from a secret location deep inside the political colossus. This is Radio Free GOP, the voice of the Republican resistance.
Part of the beauty of me is that I'm very rich. Let me tell you, I'm a really smart guy.
What's your name again? John Miller. And you work with Canada? Yes, that's correct.
Oh my God, they've got a madman on their hands.
We will have no truce nor parley with you or the grisly gang who work your wicked will. You do your worst, and we will do our best.
We've come to a turning point, a moment for hard decisions. If not us, who? And if not now, when?
It's 11:59 at Radio Free America, and this is Uncle Sam with music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the walls. The chair is against the walls.
This is Radio Free GOP with your host, Mike Murphy.
Look out, there's fear in them thar Democratic hills. Oh, all of CW is shuddering. Can Trump win? We'll talk about that, where the race is, and next week it's coming, the first big debate. We'll talk about this extraordinary event on our doorstep, and finally, my interview with my old friend, Democratic consultant extraordinaire, the one and only Paul Begala. It's all here right now on Radio Free GOP.
He used to have a big career, but now he's had enough. Podcasting's like therapy. His shrink says it's great stuff. Radio Free GOP.
There is a special smell in the air in autumn in campaigns. I've been around long enough to remember that, and it is the smell of the late September, early October panic, fear. Now, I love it. I love it because it's fun to watch, and I smell opportunity in the air when it happens. It's a good time to make a few bets. Why is it that way? Because most people who opine about politics, as opposed to those who do it, often look at the polling every single day and let that set their emotions, whether they're happy or panicking, whether they're confident or worried. In the pundit business, I think about 90% of the people who talk about politics in the media look at the morning poll and more or less reverse engineer their opinions to fit it. So something that was a home run 4 days ago is now a GOAT. And something that wasn't working 4 days ago is now a home run. You're seeing it with Trump. Now, there's no doubt the average of the public polls has tightened. Trump was stuck pretty much in 41, 42. Now he's managed to creep his way up to close to or right around 44. Hillary, on the other hand, has dropped to, in the averages, 45.3. Now, the most recent poll has her 5 up, but there's another poll that's consistently shown Trump ahead, which is the LA Times poll. So when you average them all together, it's a point race, which means statistically pretty much tied, right in the margin of error. Now, that tells me that Trump is president of yesterday. That's what these polls tell you, what's happening yesterday. But if you look at the weighing machine of the electorate, not the voting machine of the minute-to-minute gyrating polls, she still has some advantages. Now, what's getting in the way? Why don't we see the weighting machine numbers now? Well, simply put, Hillary is in the way. She is being an atrocious candidate. The lack of transparency, the parsing, she's being the worst thing you can possibly be this year. A typical politician full of doublespeak. Now, Trump, even when he's bloviating or making up facts, has the patina of telling it the way it is, for good or bad. He has the patina, the perception, creates the image of a straight shooter. Now, any factual analysis of Trump knows that that's completely crazy, but that has provided a contrast in a year where everybody hates politics to make him interesting, albeit for still less than 45% of the voters. With Trump, I believe the poll number of what you see is what you get. Nobody who's undecided is going to gravitate, in my opinion, toward Trump. So he's still stuck in his demographic cul-de-sac, and the weighing machine, when you look at the history of elections and how people tend to vote versus Trump's market share of those folks, plus his favorable, unfavorable ratings, I still see a ceiling. What Hillary needs to do is get the vote that wants to be for her. And she is in the way with this stumble-bum campaign. I think one of the problems over there is I'm not sure who's really in charge. I don't think there's a big peer who can say, no, we're canceling your schedule. Your doc told you have pneumonia. How do I know that? The body man works for me, and I knew the minute you were told. None of this wait for Huma to decide who in the campaign the candidate trusts. It's like a bad congressional race, and that's not how you run a presidential. But there's a silver lining, or maybe a zinc one in the clouds for Hillary, which is situations like this do tend to correct themselves. Democrats are worried. Nothing like a statistically tied poll, or even in Ohio and Florida, some credible polls that show Trump narrowly ahead within the margin of error. Other polls show Hillary ahead within the margin of error. But there's enough for a legit panic to break out. On one level, this will be the test of the Clinton campaign. Can they not collapse internally into a panicking firing squad and lose strategic coherence? It is a test of elephant skin, which any winning campaign needs to have. But it is also true that these kind of panics are a kick in the butt, and they do tend to force problems to be fixed. Not unlike armies that start losing battles, make some changes, face the weaknesses, and correct them. That's going to be the test of the next 2 weeks of the Hillary Clinton campaign. Can they get out of their own way? Can they up their game? And can they start moving numbers so Hillary Clinton can attract the votes that, in the polling data, want to be for her but have been pushed over to undecided? Simultaneously, can the Trump campaign find a way to get out of that cul-de-sac they've been locked into? Well, we're going to find out. The next big thing is the big thing, the first debate less than a week away. We're going to talk about that and how the candidates might be preparing for it. But first, let's welcome a new advertiser and do a little delicious commerce.
Mike Murphy, podcasting sanity, Radio Free GOP.
I'd like to welcome a new advertiser to Radio Free GOP, Blue Apron. I am delighted to have them, and I'm particularly delighted I got to eat a lot of the food. And it was good, and I was able to cook it without having the fire department involved. It's good stuff. Let me tell you how it works. They understand at Blue Apron that the key to good food is good ingredients. So they get the best, freshest stuff, and then they proportion it correctly. So whipping the recipe together with their easy recipe cards is really, really easy. For less than $10 a meal, Blue Apron delivers seasonal recipes along with these ingredients, so you get to make a home-cooked meal with a little less than the skill that's often required. That's what appealed to me, because I am no galloping gourmet. Now, whether it's Japanese ramen noodles, Alaskan salmon, or heirloom tomatoes, and by the way, one of the two recipes I cooked, the heirloom tomatoes were so fresh they were delicious. Blue Apron will always bring you the best stuff. And so all you do really is apply heat and some basic skills that are right there in the recipe cards, and you are in business with delicious food. Now, there's tremendous variety. They create new recipes every week, so you don't have the same stuff over and over again. Through an entire year, they will not repeat a menu, but you have the recipe card. So if you like a particular dish, and I really like that Tatali pasta, you can make it again anytime you want because you have all the information and you've learned how to cook it. Now, there's also tremendous flexibility. You pick how often you get the food delivered, so you can decide the frequency with which you want to have a Blue Apron home-cooked meal. And finally, it's easy. Again, the step-by-step recipe cards, most meals can be done in 40 minutes or less. I was able to do it in less than that. And again, I am not the choppiest chef around. So it's easy, it's delicious, it's fresh. I liked it. You can try it out too. Check out this week's menu and get your first 3 meals free with free shipping. All you got to do is go to blueapron.com/RFGOP for Radio Free GOP. That's how we get paid. Go to blueapron.com/Radio Free GOP. You'll find it's fresh, it's good, it's Blue Apron. It's a better way to cook. Now, I also want to thank our original advertisers, our dear pals at the Private Equity Fundcast. The economy is getting more and more interesting. It's a good time to know about what's happening in things like private equity, and there's no better place to go than the Private Equity Fundcast. It's a weekly podcast hosted by my pals Jim Milbury and Devin Matthews. These guys are partners in a Chicago-based private equity firm, and they know what they're talking about. They've spent the better part of the last 15 years buying and managing mid-market technology companies. The Funcast draws from their collective experiences to pull back the veil on private equity, much like we try to do with politics here at Radio Free GOP. These guys talk about everything from the 7 deadly sins of private equity to the good, the bad, and the ugly of board meetings. We're broadcasting from an undisclosed location in Silicon Valley now, and I can tell you, knowing how to navigate a board meeting is an important thing if you're in business almost on every level. And these guys know about that because they've been the investors and managers of many mid-market companies. So if you are the founder or owner of a business, work in management for a private equity-backed company, provide services to private companies as an investment banker, lawyer, or accountant, or you just like me, like to geek out on private equity, then subscribe to the Private Equity Funcast. You can do it. It's easy on iTunes or Google Play. One more time, that's the Private Equity Funcast on iTunes or Google Play. Now back to the podcast.
It's Resistance Podcasting, Radio Free GOP.
Well, in under a week, we've got it. The first big debate. The country will be watching. The stakes will be high, and the ride could be terrifying. Now, conventional wisdom is that Donald Trump will unscrew his head and snakes may jump out, while Hillary Clinton will be incredibly prepared. I'm not sure. I think she will be incredibly prepared. I have no doubt about that. That's who she is. She's going to want to win the spelling bee. Her hand will be raised all the time. Call on me, xylophone. I'll spell it backwards. No doubt that's who she'll be. The question is, will she bend her playbook a bit and try to use the debate to connect with the audience and shatter a bit of the caricature of this cynical politician that is totally surrounding and hurting her image? On the Trump side of the equation, his expectations are so low. If he can just show up and not chew the scenery or try to sell some bottled water or a cheap condo somewhere, the media might say, hey, that was a subdued Trump, not bad, even presidential. But the question with Trump is, can he keep the crazy bottled up for 90 whole minutes? That is asking a lot. 15, 20 minutes, sure, but 90? Particularly when, if news reports are to be believed, Team Hillary's actually hired some shrinks to give them advice on how to provoke Trump and how to handle his large ego and eccentric personality. So my guess is Trump will start slow and at least adopt the veneer of a presidential candidate. If the moderators do their job, and sometimes this is an if, and push and try to get tough, substantive issues into the debate, that is where the air gets thinner for Trump, and that may provoke President Jekyll to be replaced by candidate Hyde. Don't know. It's hard to handicap Trump. I do know this. Hillary will be prepared to the point of being over-prepared, a risk. Donald Trump's preparation, it'll be picking which tie to wear. He will wing it all the way. And with Trump, that's never dull, and it could often be self-destructive. So we'll see what happens. I'll be watching, and I'll be doing commentary on NBC afterward. I guarantee you this, it's the biggest thing to happen yet in the campaign, and it's going to have an impact, probably overshadowed only by the second debate, which tends to be the decider. So we're in a real presidential campaign now. This is not going to be dull, and for both candidates, the stakes are tremendous. How's that for pressure? We'll see what happens, and we'll talk about it the day after on the next episode of Radio Free GOP. Now with that, let's do a little commerce and then our interview with the one and only Paul Begala, where we discuss how do you debate Donald Trump and how will the Clinton campaign navigate the bumpy road they're currently on.
Fight for sanity in this crazy year on Radio Free GOP.
Okay, I have a confession to make. I am a lifetime learning nut. I know what I don't know, and I don't know a lot. And I'm interested in learning more. I'm a history nerd. I'm a science nerd. I gobble this stuff up. So the Great Courses Plus is right up my alley. What they do is they get some of the best college professors in America, and they videotape their best lectures. Then they put it on a streaming library that you can get on your laptop, on your mobile device. You can listen in your car. You can watch it on a tablet. It is all there for you to look at. And it is interesting stuff on almost every topic you can imagine. History, politics, religion, music, astronomy, statistics. You want to learn how this polling really works, where we talk to 900 people and we can tell you what millions think? You can learn about it in a statistics course. It's all there, and they're giving my listeners, I think, quite an interesting chance to test it out. I'm watching the Skeptic's Guide to American History now, which is great because it has what I love, which is the facts that make the story just a little more complicated than the simple cartoon version we've all been taught. A little more nuance, a little more complexity, and I love that kind of stuff in history. So I'm hooked on this, and I think you will be too if you give it a try, and here's how you can do that. Right now, my listeners can get a free month of unlimited access to all the Great Courses Plus lectures when you sign up. It works like this. To get your free month today, all you got to do is go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/RFG for Radio Free GOP. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/RFG, and for a month, you get to look at all the stuff you want. It's pretty cool. I love it. I think you will if you give it a try. And let's not forget our friends at Ricochet.com, the smartest and most civil center-right community on the web. No trolls, they guarantee it. Become a member, let your voice be heard, and listen to great podcasts, including this one, all for just $5 a month. And Radio Free GOP listeners get their first month free. So you get all the stuff, all their podcasts, the ability to make your voice heard, all of it for nothing for the first month. Just go to ricochet.com/join. That's ricochet.com/join and sign up today. You can also visit us here at radiofreegop.com and check out our quality American-made merch. We have our upside-down Republican elephant logo in distress. You can show your fidelity to the Republican resistance here during the last few weeks of the election. Wear the flag of honor. Buy one of our cool t-shirts. They are high quality, and they come again in navy blue or white with our groovy logo. We got another t-shirt coming out soon that's going to be a hit, so supplies are running down. Finally, on our radiofreegop.com website, you can click a little Amazon logo, and that way when you buy something on Amazon, we get a taste. You don't pay more, and we pay the electric bill. And finally, we have a PayPal button. You want to give us a few bucks, you can click that. We are always interested in your comments, so let us know. I read them all personally right here at comment@radiofreegop.com. And we are especially grateful for those kind comments you put and those star ratings on iTunes. That helps the Apple algorithm push the podcast out to more new listeners. The Republican resistance is growing, and we need the support, so thank you for doing that. It means a lot to us. Now, let's get back to our show and my interview with Paul Begala.
Radio Free GOP.
I've known our guest, Paul Begala, for a long time. He's been a good friend and a worthy opponent in many a campaign. He's a tough competitor. We go way back to even before the Clinton days when he was a consultant out there of James Carville. I wanted to talk to him about the Clinton world and how it's facing these times of adversity, what his take was on the debates, and to get his story about how, like I ask everybody, he got into this. So, without any more delay, let's talk to the one and only Paul Begala.
It's time to ask some questions and go behind the scenes. Here's our latest interview. We'll try to keep it clean. Radio Free GOP.
We are here on Radio Free GOP with my old friend, even though he's a Democrat, still a great political consultant and a smart guy, Paul Begala. Paul, thank you for doing this.
Mike, thanks a lot for having me.
So every time we do one of these things, I always start with the first question because I'm always interested about people in politics. How did you ever get into this?
I was not very good at math. So a career in finance was foreclosed, or aerospace, or any kind of dignified living. My parents were not, they were good voters or patriots, but they weren't political in the sense like they never gave money to a politician or volunteered on a campaign or any of that stuff. But I guess I got the bug as a kid. I think for me, I was born in 61. So I'm a 55-year-old man. I'm an older man. But 1974, my parents loaded us up in the Kingwood Estate station wagon, left Sugar Land, Texas, and drove for a family vacation to visit friends in Washington, D.C. That was the summer of Watergate. And the Senate Watergate Committee was hearing and all this. And that was a transition summer for me out of baseball, because I wasn't good enough to play post-Little League, and before girls. So I was 13, right?
Yeah.
So I was too young to date.
It was either politics or model rockets, one or the other, or magic tricks, one of the three. Yeah.
So I sort of fell into it accidentally, but I was transfixed that summer by all the hearings, and I just sort of fell into it. And, it was an easy and obvious career path. I went to the University of Texas. I went to law school. I got hired by Bill Clinton and then got a cable contract from CNN. So it's pretty clear, straight line plan.
Right.
In other words, it was totally accidental.
I was born in 62, so we're about the same. The conventions on TV kind of hit me. That looked like an interesting show, and it might be fun to run away to join that circus. I remember as a kid, that was a thing.
Yeah, and they wore those big headgear, and Dan Rather would be on the floor, and those were great, epic festivals.
Right, and they were on round the clock, and they were treating it like a big deal.
Gavel coverage on CBS.
Right, exactly. Now, one thing we have in kind of bizarro reverse common is I'm from Detroit, Michigan, from a family full of Democrats. My mom was a precinct committee woman. My dad has been involved, even though he's kind of a conservative Democrat in politics for a long time. My grandfather was an elected municipal politician in Detroit. So all the way through. And my brother, when he went to the University of Michigan, was proudly a member of the last IWW Wobbly Union in America at the Ann Arbor University of Michigan bookstore. So you, on the other hand, were the polar opposite, yet the same.
Yeah, my parents weren't very political. My mother's liberal, faithful Catholic, and of that kind of Pax Christi, progressive wing of the Catholic Church. My father's, he sold oil field equipment. We don't talk politics a lot, but he's no liberal. And there's 5 of us in our family. We're across the gamut. But I have one brother who's a very active Republican and a PR guy in Houston. And one of his clients in his PR business, President George Herbert Walker Bush.
Oh my goodness!
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So therefore, former President Bush calls me the good Begala. Not me. Calls my little brother Chris the good Begala. And of course, I always say that Bush Senior is the good Bush. So
it trades off.
Yeah.
Now, did you have like the rebellious streak when you were growing up, and you were the family contrarian? Everybody else went one way, you went the other.
Yeah, a bit. It was really more the area I lived in, and it was actually a great little town, but it was really, really right wing, really right wing. Still by custom, not by law. African-American kids went up in the balcony. There was a separate entrance in the Palms Theater in Sugar Land. And it was sort of de facto segregation. Now, we were integrated in the schools. I was in the 70s, so it was post-integration. But the dominant issue even then was race. Even my conservative father was very progressive on race. Never allowed bad language in the house about African-Americans or anything like that. I mean, he was always very, very progressive about that. And so it seemed to me on that issue of my childhood, the big government liberals were right and the local conservatives were wrong. And I think that had a big effect on me. But again, I didn't grow up in Detroit and see I do. I think if we'd have been separated at birth, I would have wound up a Republican.
Yeah, and I'd be a communist somewhere, right? Exactly. What politics? You get the bug young. You're kind of a contrarian in the family. I know a lot of guys like Bill Carrick, too, who grew up in the South, kind of the one generation older South, and kind of had that rebellion or that instinct to maybe see things they don't like and do something about it. What was the first job in politics? When were you actually really kind of in it at the beginning, even the small jobs?
Well, I mean, I was the student body president at my high school. I was the student body president at my college. And when I was student body president at the University of Texas, my state senator hired me as an intern, Lloyd Doggett. Now a congressman from Austin.
Sure.
Lloyd had been the student body president. He had a little kind of affinity for guys and gals who'd held that job. And so he kind of gave me a unpaid internship where I pasted things in a scrapbook or something. But I then really had the bug because then I was inside the Texas legislature, which was then the greatest show on earth. I mean, I think the media's mostly beaten all the creativity out of these guys. But back then there were a bunch of
there were more eccentrics in the game then, which was great.
Oh, it was just great. Old raving drunks. Seriously, lobbyists would push liquor carts down, mostly on Sine Die the last night. They pushed liquor carts down the hallway. I still remember one guy, speaker was mad at this guy as a state representative. And so it's a common phrase in Texas. If I'm mad at you, I'd say, I got the red ass for you.
Right, sure.
So he held up a jar of hemorrhoid cream in front of the speaker and said, I know you got the red ass for me, Mr. Speaker. You got the red ass. I got some red ass salve for you. Kept talking about the red ass. And the speaker's gaveling. And finally the guy shuts up and the speaker says, I want to welcome Mrs. McGillicuddy's kindergarten class here. And all the kids are like, holy crap.
But, that's a funny point you make because kids often come up to me and say, hey, old man, I'm thinking of getting into politics, so I figure step one, move to Washington. And I always tell them, get to a state capital.
Good for you. Absolutely.
You can learn a lot in a state capital.
Oh, and the characters, you're closer to it. I mean, I was still a student, and I was an aide to my state senator. And then later, I worked in the legislature when I was in law school. And, the guy I worked for had 2 staff positions. That was it.
Exactly.
He was one of the junior members of the legislature. And by the way, the guy next door to us, his best friend, who I got to be friends with, was a young Democrat right off the farm of Haskell, Texas, named Rick Perry.
Oh, my goodness.
And Perry would wear these jeans. He was then and now, just this great looking guy. And you know, women were like crazy for him, but he would wear ultra skin tight jeans on the floor of the house, and he would tug at himself to sort of shift things around. And so we used to call him the Crotch. And he'd say, "Hey, Crotch, how you doing? How you going to vote on the highway bill today?" You know. And so, you know, that was back when he was a single man and a Democrat. So,
well, you're right about the 2 jobs thing too. That's what, you know, they're a small staff. So if you're a kid and you're ready to hustle and work and learn something, you can get noticed quick.
Absolutely, it's great. You're completely right. I say the same thing that people say. Well, I want to start at CNN. So why don't you go home and work for the Lufkin Daily Herald?
Yeah.
Or I guess, you know, now it's probably the Texas Tribune, which is an online terrific newspaper. It covers
right, but
politics.
go cover a car crash or a couple of highway bills or something.
Absolutely.
I agree. Here's the guy who has the best state house story of all time. John Engler, former governor of Michigan, friend and client of mine. So this is a true story.
I see him at church, by the way. He's a member of St. Luke Catholic Church. I see him at Mass.
Good practicing
good
Catholic.
Faithful Catholic.
So Engler goes to Michigan State University from Isabella County, which is dairy country in the center of Michigan. I know because weirdly enough, when we were filming him in 1990 on the first long shot campaign, I'm up there and I see the grain silo next to his and it's got a shamrock on it. And I'm like, what? That's the Murphy farm. Yeah? Turns out it's my cousins. Oh. They grew up in adjacent farms up in Mount Pleasant. But anyway, so there's young John Engler. My grandfather, the Paul, used to always call him young Engler in the state legislature. Tell him to do something about judges' pensions. You know? But so young Engler, before the state legislature, goes down to Michigan State, agricultural economics degree, and he gets a job as a page at the state capitol in Lansing. So he gets the best Sears double knit, you know, in purple or whatever. I've seen pictures. It's fantastic. And he goes off and he bumps into the local state rep. Now, it turns out that his dad had primaried the local state rep 2 years before in a very gentlemanly old school Republican primary where each guy spent $100 on, you know, 4x8s, and that was the whole thing, and lost 60-40 or whatever the number was. So it was, you know, not like politics today. And he said, "Oh, you're Matt Engler's boy," to young John Engler. "Yeah, you're fired." And a second days later, and fired him. Now, little did old Clem or whatever his name is know that young John Engler then goes back and switches his major to political science.
Wow.
Writes a campaign paper about running for office, and 2 or 4 years later, primaries him himself, beats him, and becomes the youngest state rep in the state.
God, that's great.
So
that's an important lesson.
Be nice to interns.
Be nice to the interns.
They rule the world in time.
That's amazing.
Then you get out of the state capitol, and you got into, I remember back in the Paul Begala days when you were out doing the campaign consulting before Clinton. You had a couple of big races.
We did. We had a couple of big losses to begin with.
Yeah, we all do. My middle name is Right to Rise Guy for the rest of my life now. But, you know, it is what it is.
Carville, because this state senator, Doggett, who'd hired me, decided to run for U.S. Senate. This is 1984. And John Tower retires. Doggett decides to run carrying the liberal mantle. And I carried his coats. You know, I carried his bags. That was,
right, sure.
You know, it was, by the way, another great job.
Body men is the job to get if you want to eventually be White House Chief of Staff.
You see, I saw every part of Texas. Wound up like on one of these single engine planes being flown by a drunk trial lawyer.
Right,
like, oh my God, we're going to. So it was just a great experience. Carville was a campaign manager. So we were hardly equals, right? He was the big boss and I was the lowest guy on the totem pole, but we kind of struck up a friendship. Now, that election, we got 42%. Is the biggest ass whipping in Texas history that a Democrat had ever received. This is Lyndon Johnson's old seat. Right. Tower was the only Republican we'd ever elected since the Civil War. And all of a sudden, in the Senate. And so all of a sudden, we had this landslide against us. I mean, it was just a catastrophe. You know, Doggett was a great, proud liberal.
Yeah, he was kind of the father of the more progressive movement in the modern, anyway, Texas Democrats, because it's been very Tory before that.
Yeah, well, there'd always been a split between sort of the Conley conservatives and this guy, Ralph Yarborough, who was like the other great liberal. Yeah. Those were the two parties, the conservative Democrats and the liberal Democrats. The conservatives usually won, and they dominated the state. But this is 84. You have to think about this. We had the narrowest primary victory in history, eking out a victory over Kent Hance, who's a guy that beat George W. Bush for Congress.
I saw the Kent Hance stem winder in the back of a pickup truck later when he became a Republican, and it was old school, man. He
had
great, that voice,
what
too.
A gifted politician. And he calls everybody, he doesn't remember his names, so he calls everybody Joe Don, which he's from Lubbock, and half the people in Lubbock. If you just call everybody Joe Don.
He 500 on that most of the time,
right. So I got to tell you one story about that race, though. I was the body man, and we go to San Antonio, and there's a fundraiser in the backyard of this trial lawyer's house. It's just beautiful. And this very well-dressed young man comes up and hands Doggett a check. He says, can you take a picture? I take his camera. They didn't have camera phones in. I take the picture. I give it back to him. It's all good. Turns out that guy was a gay rights activist. And he hosted a fundraiser, unbeknownst to us, at the local gay club in San Antonio. And the ad he put in the paper, this was the text. Come to a Lloyd Doggett for Senate fundraiser at whatever the name of the club was, featuring Frankie the Banana Queen and Mr. Gay Apollo in an all-nude male gay strip show.
Right.
Proceeds
Bill Graham
to Doggett
is still
for Senate.
talking about this.
So
yeah.
Graham clips that out. And then the next issue of the gay press in San Antonio has the photograph of the guy giving Doggett the check, which I took. And so Bill Graham, in 1984 in Texas, and Doggett, God bless him, Graham ran an ad, which today, of course, you couldn't do. He said, Lloyd Doggett believes that homosexuals should be able to drive school buses. And Doggett said, well, yeah, of course. Obviously, if they have a good license. I mean, yes, of course. So that was not a very popular position in 1984 in Texas, but you live and learn.
Yeah, no, that we all get knocked around. That's the education of it. But still, that race is how you met Carville.
Right. And so we got 42% and wound up launching a reasonably successful career, only in America.
I think the race that really broke you guys through, at least that was on my radar screen, was the Pennsylvania race.
Right. Harris Wofford in 1991.
Right.
Senator Hines died in a plane crash. It was terrible. Our client, Bob Casey, was the governor of Pennsylvania. Casey, he looked at all kinds of people. General P.X. Kelly, who had been a hero of the first Gulf War. He looked at Lee Iacocca, looked at Rich Trumka, who was then the head of the United Mine Workers, now the head of the AFL-CIO.
The most appropriately named union boss ever.
Trumka. Man, he is great. I mean, he clangs when he walks down the hall. When Trumka's going. But he wound up with Harris Wofford. Great guy. Had worked for Martin Luther King. Had worked for President Kennedy, but totally unknown. I was 30, and so I got to be the campaign manager. Carville was the big shot general consultant. And we got lucky. You kind of hit the sweet spot, wound up running basically a single issue campaign on healthcare. And we started out 47 points behind Dick Thornburgh, popular, beloved two-term governor, then the attorney general for the very popular President Bush. And we won by 10.
Right.
And I'm happy to say that the ad guy for Thornburgh, Roger Ailes.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I didn't know that.
The other consultant was Carl Rove.
Right, sure.
And Carl and Roger somehow overcame that setback and had pretty dang successful careers.
And that was it. And I remember that put the healthcare issue on the map because there's that cloakroom effect. And it's not always true. But whatever the other senators or the DC chattering class thinks the race was about, whether or not it was or not, becomes the new shiny object nationally. It kind of, in a special election like that and everybody's watching, it kind of flows up.
Really, and it taught me a lot. When we did the survey, we had a recession coming on. And Pennsylvania, jobs economy, 85%, and an open-end question.
Right.
Paul, what's the most important issue facing Pennsylvania? Wofford at the time, he'd had this wonderful career in civil rights in the Kennedy administration. At the time, he was Governor Casey's Secretary of Labor and Industry. So we go over the polling with him. Our polling is done by Mike Donlin, brilliant guy.
Smart guy, yeah.
Oh, and so Donlin and I are sitting down with Wofford. And it's like, look, it's obviously about jobs. And Wofford says, he's not a politician. He's a kind of absent-minded professor. He said, actually, the real problem with jobs is healthcare. It's like every strike I have, every shutdown I have, every plant that's moving, they all tell me that they're getting killed by the healthcare costs. So you really actually, if you were just being honest here, do something about jobs, we'd have to do something about healthcare. And Donald and I are like, okay. And we tested in the poll and it popped.
Wow, bingo, you found it.
Yeah, it taught me that it helps to listen to your clients. Sometimes they know more than you.
One of the little tricks of this is there is a tendency sometimes in the consulting industry to say, yeah, read the script.
Right,
You're going to be the pogo stick guy. Here's a pogo stick. But he's talking about healthcare, one, because he's feeling it in his job. But also, he's talking about healthcare because he cares about it, which means he's good at talking about it.
That's right. It was authentic.
When in doubt, make the campaign an amplifier. Just find the piece of healthcare that people care about that can, tumble the lock clicks to get it done.
And he called me. I was so stressed because we had the polling that showed we could win, unless I screwed it up. And that's how as when you're in a campaign, that's how you take on that kind of mantle, that responsibility. So every day I sweated the money. We were the underdog. We weren't raising much money. How much money were we? How much money? So Wofford went off to a fundraiser. Calls me up afterwards. It's 10 or 11 at night. And I says, how'd the fundraiser go? He said, well, I think we raised some money. he's not focused on that. He said, but I heard a really good idea. I said, fuck you, Harris. I can't spend fucking ideas. I need fucking money. And he said, yeah, well, hear me out. And I did, and thank God. He said,
it wasn't a gay strip club fundraiser. Phil Graham's not that lucky. Won a lifetime.
He said an ophthalmologist came up to him at this fundraiser and said, your intellectual predecessors were lawyers, and they wrote the Constitution. That's why you have a right to a lawyer. My intellectual forebears were doctors. It seems to me if a criminal has a right to a lawyer, why doesn't a working person have a right to a doctor? And oh my God, as soon as he said that, ding.
Yeah, there it is.
There was the ad.
It's still with us. That's still the argument.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And it was an ophthalmologist who never made a nickel off it, of course. I don't remember the guy's name.
Oh, my goodness. Well, he made his dent on political rhetoric.
Yeah.
So after that, you guys are hot. Nothing like winning a big special statewide.
Right.
And so the phone's ringing off the hook. Because I remember I was working in Texas back in early 90, and there was this mayor's race in Houston, just a quick sidestep here. And I remember there was all this, some of the local Texans were like, yeah, this guy Fred Hofheinz is running, his campaign manager was living in a car, because the Hurricane James had not come to Houston yet or whatever. I remember that.
Carville and I, Fred Hofheinz.
Fred Hofheinz, right. He gave it a good run, I remember, but
he'd been a great sort of young phenom mayor in the 70s. His father, Judge Roy Hofheinz, was the legend of legends, built the Astrodome and lived in it for a while. Put an apartment in there for himself.
And very Texas kind of thing to do.
Very Texas thing. And Fred was the boy mayor, young genius, and then kind of just got off the merry-go-round. And so like 20 years later, tried to come back and fell short.
I was doing Rob Moosebacker, Mockbacker, Mossbacker, and we were doing great. We were just racing up there, but we were fighting tough old, Bob Bullock, the lieutenant governor and kind of the crusher of Texas.
The last Democrat to win statewide in Texas, and that was 1994.
Right. Great old school, tough Paul. Took the state king air to Alaska once because he could, Anyway, we're number 2 on the Clayton Williams ticket, so everything went upside down. But I just remember that. Then I remember Wofford, and then that brings us to the big one,
right.
Bill Clinton. How did you guys wind up there?
Accident. Zell Miller, the governor of Georgia, had been our client, very close friend of Clinton's. Clinton goes to see Zell, says, I'm going to run. Zell says, I'm for you. I'm on Dorsha. I will move my primary up because Zell was, and Clinton were very concerned that the South have greater influence in the Democratic Party. And so he said, I'll move my primary up. And he had the kind of power to do that. And he said, as an aside almost, you got to talk to these boys who ran my race. James Carville, Paul Begala. Clinton said, I never heard of him. It was before Wofford.
Right.
So then he called us. He said, you're going to work for Bill Clinton. We're like, it doesn't work that way, Governor. Come on, we got to. And it said, well, at least meet with him. And we met with him. It was love at first sight. And he tried to hire us in. And we said, look, if we win for Wofford, that's the best thing we can do to help you become president. So leave us alone. We're going back to Pennsylvania. Right. And then after he won, we met with Bob Kerrey, who, you just fall in love with the guy. Yeah. He is a, by God, American hero. And met with Tom Harkin, who's a special favorite of mine. He's prairie populist. I'm more sort of populist wing of the party. Really my kind of guy. But Clinton was everything. He was everything you want. And in fact, that's what Carville said when we left. He said, my only question is this guy too good to be true?
Yeah.
Which is kind of what voters said too. There was
he turns on that personality weapon of his. You wonder, it's so powerful. Could it be really what's there? Is it worked alone?
Absolutely.
Did you guys have a disagreement, or you were both? It was Clinton.
It was Clinton.
Do you have different second choice?
Yeah, I was. Carville's a Marine.
Right.
And so even though I was starstruck by Senator Kerry, he really admired him and kind of, I think, really wanted to work for him just because, first off, who he is. And Kerry is the ultimate iconoclast. So is Carville. Right. So not only are they both, veterans, they were both very much like exist to stick a thumb in the eye of the man, right? Harkin is more like my guy because he's a populist from kind of farm country.
So what was it that got James and you to move from kind of the guys you had that affinity with that really thought Clinton? Was it that this candidate Horse is going to run farther, or
we were just in love with him. I mean, it's never before since have I been that impressed with someone in politics on first meeting. It's just extraordinary.
Now, when you met with them or pitched them or however the process was Hillary there too?
No. His buddy and sometimes lawyer Bruce Lindsay was. So they were traveling around together, and they came through D.C. So the two of them and Carville and me met in one of these lobbies and drank iced tea and his pitch was so smart. I mean, he was trying to recruit us, frankly, and it's the only guy that ever did this to me. He didn't talk strategy with his strategist. He talked about the country. He talked about his daughter. Carville and I didn't have kids yet, but separately. I mean, we have kids with other spouses, not with each other. But we were really blown away that the guy was treating us as if we were citizens who love our country,
right?
Rather than just hacks. He could have said, "Look, Miller's going to move the primaries.
Yeah,
to the
I
South
think I can do this and spin
my
around
wife's
there.
from Chicago.
I know the number 2 guy in New Hampshire is going to be for me.
Yeah, Vernon Jordan can raise me money, and it was none of that for all afternoon. It was just all these great ideas about how to fix the country.
I had a guy like that, Lamar Alexander.
Yeah.
Who was of Clinton's generation as another New South governor.
Right.
And they always were kind of like warily eyeing each other as they were coming up. And Lamar convinced me to go down to see him. And, he was a long shot back in 95. But he did the same thing. And it really impressed me. And I wound up signing up with him. And I'm glad I did. I was always very proud to work for Lamar.
He's a good man, and they're not making him anymore.
Yeah. He'd been a governor, which is a good place to run for president from, both politically and from life experience, I think, being an executive.
I strongly agree. It was the McCain-Obama race, the only time in American history that each party nominated a sitting senator. Yeah. And there's a good reason for that. I mean, we prefer governors, vice presidents, Civil War generals, so far only from the Union side, prejudice against the Confederacy. Right. But that I think people are sensible that way.
Yeah.
To be looking for executive experience.
They want the job to fit the guy, I think.
Right.
So you meet with Clinton. He pitches you. It's a great pitch. When did you first meet Hillary? Because she's a partner in that world. She's very smart.
Once we were hired on,
right,
which was my recollection, beginning of December of 91. Clinton didn't even announce till October of 91, and the first primary was February.
Yeah, wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Sprint. Yeah.
And that's because President Bush was so overwhelmingly popular.
Right.
And so all the Democrats with sense, Lloyd Benson, Dick Gephardt, who I'd worked for before, Jay Rockefeller, Al Gore, Sam Nunn, all the heavyweights took a pass.
Yeah, well, everybody was so intimidated by those numbers post-Gulf War. I'll never forget, I was a young consultant then, and they used to do this thing where they'd bring everybody into the White House in Bush first term. And they brought me along because I'd done a couple of statewides, and everybody went around the room. The political director at the time was a good guy, so I'll spare his name on the phone, but had this chart on the wall behind him with like the approval number, like ready to break the frame. And so we went around the room, and all the Republican conventional wisdom was the same thing. Unstoppable, unbeatable. This is amazing. I've never seen anything. And they come around to me, and I say, I think we're in real trouble. And all of a sudden, needle scratch. Who's this jerk? And I said, the wrong track's really bad. Country's mad economically, and eventually that train will hit our train, and our war train is over. So I'd be really worried about thinking. And I never forget, it was a long silence. Thank you. And that was it. I was off the list the rest of my career. But it taught me a lesson about how the DC world can easily get into and we're talking about this a little bit of polling now, and we get to the current situation. But the DC world can talk itself into a lot of wrong think because it moves as a group really
Absolutely.
quickly.
And that's a great point. And it's why, again, getting back to your earlier advice, tell young people, get their ass out in America.
Right.
That's my joke I always use, is the Founding Fathers defined the district as 10 miles squared surrounded by reality.
Right. And when I was running my consulting company, when I was doing races, I never hired anybody out of like the committees. Nothing wrong with it. That's a good place to wind up. But I would much rather find the kid who ran the good state treasurer race in Indiana or something and bring them in than not. So you're now in the Clinton world. It's 90-day sprint. Right. Because it wasn't like now where they declare in fifth grade. It was 90 days to the primary.
That's the shortest election of our lifetime.
Yeah, because the guys who had that audacity got in when it looked impossible, and all of a sudden they found out they bought a value stock because the president's numbers started to drop, and then bingo, off they go. What's your biggest memory of that first 90-day sprint from basically in the race to the New Hampshire comeback?
Well, yeah, Clinton went from being completely unknown. We'd carry our own bags onto Delta Airlines to being one of the most famous people in the world, and that was thanks to the scandals. Right. He gave all these lectures at Georgetown, which was his alma mater, beautiful. And we worked all night on them, these 90-minute addresses about foreign policy, about domestic policy, about economic policy, about social policy. And nobody gave a crap. Right. I mean, a few of the big brains, Ron Brownstein, who's then with the LA Times, E.J. Dionne, there were a few of the big brains.
Which builds a foundation for later that they can then become amplifiers of, there's something here.
Clinton used to say, we got to win the ideas primary, then the money primary, then the New Hampshire primary. And that did kind of put him on the map. But then he was accused of all these infidelities, and it became astonishing overnight.
Yeah.
And through all of that, it was really weird how calm he was. Mario Cuomo had sent him a book called Lincoln on Leadership. And we didn't have Secret Service then. So he's riding around in a van, thumbing through this book, just loving it. As we're heading toward 500 cameras. I mean, Deutsche Welle was there, Pakistani television. It was the biggest thing on earth. And I'm sitting in the back of the van watching this guy in the front passenger seat, completely calm. It was bizarre. It was otherworldly. And then, he just got out and, did his shtick.
What was the thinking in the campaign the last, 4 weeks to New Hampshire as you're navigating all that? One was you're going to get the world's biggest microphone, and the first question is going to be terrible, but then grab the world's biggest microphone and run with it. But who were you watching as kind of, obviously you had Tsongas out there.
Right.
But what was the problem with Tsongas was I always thought he was running for a minority piece of the Democratic primary because he was trying to be a fiscal conservative.
Right.
Who was the other person in the more regular Democratic lane that you thought
Kerry.
might come up?
Kerry was running on single-payer health care.
Right. Sounds familiar. Right.
Such a dynamic guy and ran a pretty effective protectionist ad. I still remember it, with a hockey goalie.
Oh, right. I do too, yeah.
Keeping the bad...
Was that Shrum? Who was doing that
I think it was
race?
Shrummy, yeah. I think it was Bob Shrum. We're terribly concerned about them. But the story really became Clinton. And the accusations of infidelity he handled really well. And then came the accusations that he dodged the draft. And that's when the bottom fell out.
Yeah.
Because I think voters, understandably, said that's more about public policy than private life.
One thing is you can kind of disapprove of, he's kind of a slippery bachelor, womanizer. But then when he's cheating around the draft and obligation, things like that, takes it to a new level of
and it hurt.
Troubling.
That hurt him enormously. And we dropped from leading. I mean, we were in a multi-candidate race for above 35. And we were going to win to single digits. I mean, it was a meltdown of epic proportions. And, that's why it became such a legend that he came back and placed a close second. But we actually lost New Hampshire, which people don't remember.
Right, exactly.
They made movies about it, but we lost.
But it was one of the great, and this happens in politics, where the loss is really perceived as a win.
Right. And that was because of a really smart guy, Joe Grandmaison. Joe deserves a special place in heaven because he signed on to our campaign the day after the first of those infidelity scandals broke, the day after. Former New Hampshire State Party chairman signed on the day after. You talk about buying low. It's a value stock.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. That guy, he ought to be on the Supreme Court.
Yeah. I always tell, sometimes donor types or political endorser types come and say, when should I endorse? I say either really early, and then you're making a bet, but you're noticed, or on the worst day of the campaign, because then you're never going to be forgotten.
Very smart.
But it's hard to do. What they always want to do is be the last guy on once it's a sure thing, which means nobody will care.
Right.
They get nothing.
We couldn't believe we'd survived and then had done so well. We were like 25%.
Right.
After the collapse, we were like 4 or 5 in our last poll. We thought we'd be weak single digits, maybe get knocked out of the race entirely. And here we'd done so much better than we had feared. And so Joe says, go downstairs and declare victory. Don't wait for Tsongas. Don't follow protocol. Don't be polite. And I'm sure it was time for the 11 o'clock news, right? He tells Clinton, go down there now and declare yourself the winner because you're the story.
Right.
Because you've survived. Step on Tsongas. And boy, it was brilliant. And I got Clinton, to his great credit in his memoir, gave me the credit for the line, I feel like the comeback kid. Because I'm a sports fan, a fight fan, and I was thinking about Rocky and all those great kind of...
and that's the other half of the
equation. Because Rocky loses, by the way, in Rocky 1. Spoiler alert, but
if you're taking that space, you better have the best soundbite ever to fill it with.
Yeah, and he knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, and the rest, as we say, is history.
Well, to this day, he's still a comeback kid,
Yeah. So here we are now.
Right.
We're shoot to the forward. 8 years. That's another podcast, the White House years. But here we are. We are in the middle of what I like to say is crazy times demand a crazy election. Because who would have thunk it? So what's your view of what's going on? It's an interesting week to me because we're having our first real kind of Democratic mini panic, at least in the donor world, which, as you well know, panics very easily. We have a media that covers everything like the Hindenburg, no matter how trivial. Yet we have real structural problems, I think, in the beloved nominee of my party. That said, the daily tracking that drives 90% of the pundit insight, they all reverse their opinions to fit whatever that rolling poll is definitely boiling over. So what's your take on what's really going on in the race? And then how you think it'll play out in Democratic land over the next 10 days as people freak out during this period.
Well, this is a good testing time for Hillary's campaign, right? You're exactly right. I advise a super PAC that supports Hillary, so I have a vested interest as well as personal. But I also have access to polls that the press doesn't. And the truth is, the private polling is much more stable than the public polling. Why? Because we have a consistent methodology. ABC different from CBS.
Yeah, calling
CNN
adults,
different.
yeah.
So
the Republican side, everybody thinks the same thing.
Right. So we've seen a much more consistent race, which is a very narrow Hillary lead within the margin of error. And this could go either way. It really could. That's where the race really honestly is. But the hyperventilation just I find amusing, both in the press, in the punditry, and in the donor world. I have to say, I haven't heard from any donors, so they've been fine so far. But you see unnamed sources in the media complaining and bedwetting. David Plouffe should be in the Hall of Fame, not only for electing the first African-American president, but for coming up with that term, bedwetting. So this morning, I'm on CNN. New polls, and I'm sure they're good. They're CNN's. Trump's leading. He's leading in the swing states. He's leading nationally, narrowly, but leading. He's been trailing for weeks and months. Right. Now he's leading. What do you think? And my first response was, I'm an older man. I'm old enough to remember when Hillary was up by 10 in the Washington Post poll among registered voters and 5 among likely voters. Of course, that was a long time ago. It was 4 whole days. 4 days. She's ahead by 10. Now she's trailing by 5. Whatever. Seriously. I mean, this. I grew up in a small town, and I know a lot. I have a farm, actually, and I know a little bit about farming. And if you want to make that row straight, you got to look all the way to the end of the field.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're driving a tractor and you're looking right over the hood, you're going to swerve everywhere. But if you want to stay true, look down to the end of the field. And Hillary's campaign, I can't talk to them, so I'll talk to them through this. They're smart people. They've been through this. She has a lot of Obama veterans. It's not simply a bunch of old Bill Clinton retreads like me. She's got some of the best people. And my guess is they have a pretty deep keel. But we'll see. Now, if she starts firing people, I think it'd be a terrible sign.
Yeah, I agree with that. If you really do this, kind of like basketball coaches, that on any one night, anybody can beat anybody.
Right.
But over a 100-game season, it's a different story. And you want to look at what do you know? Because we know a lot about what Election Day looks like in terms of who will be voting. And then you kind of reverse engineer that reality to who's getting what they should or shouldn't have of that reality. And you learn to discount the polling bumps a lot. Now, I never trust a poll of adults, even when on a august cable network. But it is going to be interesting to see how they weather the bumps here. Mm-hmm. My view is that I did a little bit of business on last week's podcast and I won't make people listen to this again, but I took the last 30 days of Real Clear, the average of all polls, good and bad, methodologically, but a big brute force average, and I did the Trump number. 41, 41, 41, 41, 41, 41, 42, 41, 41, 42, 43, 33, 2, 3, 3, 3. Pretty damn flat. My interpretation of her problem is the generic vote wants to lift her a little higher based on demography, but she gets in her own way quite a lot. And we've had that for a week. If she can improve her game and get out of the wonk business into the connecting business, then gravity will take over. And that's a 4 to 5 point race for her. We're not there now. We're in about a 2 or 3 point race because he's at the top of his range, which is still somewhat limited. She's at the bottom of hers. And it's incumbent on her. I think she controls the race a lot more than Trump does.
Well, that's where the movement's been. Now, the latest, like the CNN poll has Trump, he's been steady at 41, you're right. But he's at 45, 47 in a few of these.
Yeah.
And in some of the swing states. That's noteworthy, troublesome for me as a Hillary guy, but just as an analyst, I start to look at that and say, okay, let's take a look at what's happening. But I think it's more what you say, which is she is a wonk. She wants to run as a wonk. And people want to connect. They want to know what's behind that. What are the values that animate those policies?
Yeah.
And that's harder for her. She's not somebody who likes opening up her heart. She's just not. And she's going to have to if she wants to win this. That's what people are actually looking for. The other thing is it's 65% wrong track.
Yeah.
And we are the third
best
term.
thing that's going on the Trump side.
Absolutely.
Fire them all.
There's only 2 messages ever in American politics.
Yeah.
Stay the course and time for a change. And so the fact that the president's job approval is very high now, 58 in the Washington Post poll, maybe it's probably like 51, 52.
But yeah, right around 52 or 3.
This average is really interesting to me. I don't know which way it will go, but if you have 65 wrong track, 52 presidential approval, that can't last. Those two will converge.
I bet on the wrong track, like my story about Bush 1 in the long term. It says Trump Trump is in such a demographic cul-de-sac, as I'm fond of saying.
Right.
It's hard for me to see him putting it all together. And if Trump has a week where the media machine, at least the CW, is he's ahead, the race is over, it's Trump.
Right.
That'll just bring more heat upon Trump, and how he handles that heat will be the real test of that campaign.
Well, and we saw it today. He went to Flint yesterday.
Right.
He spoke at a church.
Got the hook.
And the pastor came up and she said, he was hammering Hillary. I have to say, it's a pretty forgivable sin. I know it's in a church, but I've been in 1,000 churches for campaign events that were campaign.
I've been on the other end of a lot of churches doing a lot of hammering on from the Dem side. So it's totally normal.
I really do forgive him for that. And the pastor didn't like it, so he had to shut up, and he did. But then this morning, it's fine. It's fine, right? At least you're trying. Good for you, Donald. Then this morning he wakes up, calls into Fox, and attacks the pastor. Right. Like, what are you crazy? He already attacked the Pope a few months ago. Now he's attacking this really impressive, dignified pastor who welcomed him into Flint but did not want a partisan speech in her church.
The thing is, Trump's strength is the great unfiltered ability to command earned media. His weakness is it's always unfiltered. So, he helps and hurts himself simultaneously. Tactically, he's great at grabbing the space, but his content is full of problems once you get out of a Republican primary. But let me ask you a question about Hillary, because I agree, you got guys like Joel there. There's deep experience on the staff. But they also, at least the core staff has this, Clinton staff culture of holding stuff back, not disclosing a lot. I mean, they really did bum the basic tactics of handling the Scooby-Doo van incident. I mean, that was an easy press release. Yes, she's had pneumonia for 2 days. There'll be a doc statement out in an hour. Yet they let it hang out there because even I think the top of the command didn't know. Is that just a culture thing they got to get over?
Yeah, yes, I think it's a fact of having been 25 years in that spotlight. A lot of landmines going off, stuff you didn't expect, and I do think that they have to and I think they would tell you this. They had to be quicker about disclosing that.
Yeah. Okay. And in general, I mean, I think they could have. Look, I'm a huge critic of many things she did as Secretary of State, and I think there is some issue of the Benghazi stuff, but they could have handled it in a way that didn't amplify the criticism by hunkering down and parsing so much. It just seems like they have a blind spot for that. And not as a matter of Republican, Democrat, or whatever we disagree on, but just on the technique of campaigning, it surprises me.
Yeah, it's hard. She's not a natural politician.
Yeah.
So when she's feeling vulnerable, she wants to hide that. Right. And the truth is, the public would like to see a little vulnerability.
Right. It would do her good.
I've had women tell me that this isn't part of woman thing. And I had dinner with some bunch of businesswomen last night, and businessmen, but the women, and they're all, I think, Republicans. It's some, corporate thing. And it was really interesting. They were saying, you don't get it. Like, we have to soldier on. We're not allowed to say, I feel bad. We're not allowed to cry. She's like, your guys can cry. And it's true. President Bush cried all the time. Clinton, even Dole, a war hero, wept openly when he was moved. But women can't. And so I do think some of it, in addition to having had these things exploding all around her all these years, which makes you risk averse, on top of that, I'm very open to the argument that these women were giving me, that some of it is a woman thing, where when Bill Clinton got sick in 1992, got terrible flu. We announced that, say, hey, the governor's sick. He's going home to Arkansas. Took 4 days off the trail. Mm-hmm. And nobody cared. Now, he was 45 and obviously vigorous. His opponent was incumbent president, had just thrown up in the Japanese prime minister. So we weren't as worried about the health issue.
Yeah, I think somehow they amplify their vulnerabilities a little with that method of operating. And it's funny. I've worked for and against female candidates.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked for successful female governors. And anytime you're working for a female candidate, there's often a bunch of aides who really want to explain to you the different rules. They tend to be women. And what I always say is maybe, but I think the way to handle the woman thing is to obsess less on the woman thing. Mm-hmm. And because the overthink danger there is really dangerous. And I think if they're constantly trying to overcompensate for something, it's not helping. I mean, I don't know anybody in the Democrat world at this point, and we are in the middle of a panic moment, and people love to panic. It's easy. Call up here, it's terrible, it's the worst thing ever, if only they'd listen. Why don't they get Spielberg in there? I live in LA, so I walk down the street, I see Volts swerving out of their lane, people yelling into cell phones.
Teslas ramming into
we got to get Rahm Emanuel in this game. It's unbelievable. But it is still, despite all that, there is a level of unhappiness with her performance that if she won't reverse it, you know what happens? It starts to turn inward and becomes the big thing that blocks out the sun inside the campaign when you're trying to manage it.
Well, and so we'll see how she manages her way out of this and performs her way out of it. She's not going to walk out on stage tomorrow and be Barack Obama. She's not going to be Bill Clinton. She's not a natural politician. I actually, when she first started thinking, I counseled her against running for the Senate. I said, "You're not a politician. You're not going to enjoy this." It shows you my prognosticating skills. But this is why I think the debates are going to matter so much.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you next. So they're going to be in a bumpy little period now.
Right.
They're going to have some scary polls that, on the other hand, also set up the narrative of the big finish. You can ride
the comeback
polls.
kid.
Right, exactly. But that takes real elephant skin. We'll see if they have it and if they can improve her. The debates are going to be tricky.
Right.
Because even though she's got that demographic headwind and is holding a lot more cards in the poker game, I am heartbroken to say as a Republican, but I can't vote for Trump, so I'm a man without a country on this thing. What's your thinking about debate prep? Because I'm curious, as the most prepared person in the world, is there anything else she can learn to do? Because I think alone, that's not new information to people, and it's time for some new information, I think, from their point of view, to move numbers.
I suspect she is primed to eviscerate Trump. Now, there's a risk of that too. You don't want to be too negative. Usually we give women a little broader berth, frankly, running against a man. The same thing. I worked for women, Senator Feinstein and Senator Boxer, both of your California senators are former clients of mine, and worked against women. I worked for Jim Florio, who was beaten by Christy Todd Whitman. Very impressive candidate.
I was particularly proud of that campaign consultant, me.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, she was a good candidate. And that was a great race.
It was a great race.
We
You guys,
the hammer and tong, man.
Yeah. I mean, we went at as hard as we could, and she took everything. We hit her as hard as we could, metaphorically speaking.
I knew she was a tough character. And a quick tangent, when she was on her farm, and I think you guys or some Democratic sent a Betacam crew to age myself with old technology, a camera crew to film some of the farm because of the tax break she took.
Right.
And her response was to grab the family rifle and head out to put a bullet in the gun. Oh, Governor, we're not going to shoot our opponents. We've got these scary people here we can send out to handle it. But yeah, she's tough.
Yeah.
She was great.
And so from that experience, I do think women have a little wider berth. And she's a lawyer. Okay. And often lawyers don't make the best politicians, even though it's so common. But in this setting, I think she will want to prosecute the case for herself and against Trump. And I think that could work very well. What you don't know is which Trump's going to show up. Is it going to be...
Or all of them.
Right. He may switch around.
He'll be selling water 1 minute, and then he'll be talking about Vince Foster. I mean, I think it's going to be...
viciously attacking
completely.
The Pope or a minister from Flint. Or will it be Thorazine Don? Right? Will they just inject him with something that mellows him out for 90 minutes? And I think that he has accidentally, or the press has, set the bar so low for himself. So he went and met with the Mexican president. He went 24 minutes without saying anything racist. And we all, I covered it live with CNN. Oh, very impressive. Very good, Donald. Come on. And of course, by the time he got back on his plane, he was in a Twitter war with the guy.
Well, also, the guy rolled him, which you could see coming a mile away. Brings him down there. They do this phony little summit thing, which is a big nothing burger. Cable TV has a complete cow over it. And then the local guy, who's got his own huge political problems, could hardly wait to tweet out, "Oh, I showed that gringo to what's what. We're not paying a dime." And then we're off into Trump crazy Twitter stuff all the way back.
Well, because in the room, I have to say, having worked for a president, he got it exactly backwards. In the private room is when you put the wood to them.
Yeah.
Okay, I've seen this. And you go at them hard. But then in public, you have to be, because you want to get a deal. It's just like your kids. You know, you discipline in private and praise in public. And Trump got exactly backwards. In the room, apparently he folded when the president said, "We're not paying for your stupid wall." And he's like, okay. And then publicly falsely denied that it came up. Right. And then when he was home back in America, started the Twitter war with the guy. It's exactly the wrong way to handle it.
That is a truth of Trump. And
right.
I've looked at a lot of Trump and learned a lot about him during the primaries. He is super confrontational when it's him and a microphone and a friendly interviewer or an adoring throng. In the debate stuff, he tends to want everybody to love him. If you look at the footage of the Republican debates, he'd slam back and forth for a while, but by the end of it, he's hugging everybody and wants to be part of the team. I mean, it's clearly the real villain here is Fred Trump. I wish I had a time machine to go back and tell him, be a little nicer to your kid. It's going to cause a lot of headaches for us later in life. So
I could see Hillary turning to him and say, "You know, you've called me XYZ. Say it to my face right now."
Yeah, but I think, the problem with that strategy for Hillary is I want you to goad him to be crazy. You will eventually get the crazy out of him.
Right.
I think he'll start on Thorazine and then he'll break loose. And so it's just going to be interesting. And the problem with prosecuting him is in her heart, she's got a little bit of the Tracy Flick thing. She wants to win the spelling bee. I'm better prepared. I know the answer. The capital of Saskatchewan, and blurt out answers. And when every high school debate coach in America will be giving her little red X's next to her name and she'll be winning. But in the television moment of strength, his overbearingness, if she goes into the brain squawking at him and he's being a blundering idiot, all she will do, in my view, is catch a case of Trumpism herself, which will do her a little good.
Huge
so
risk.
It's a tricky way to handle just the bullying. And there is a gender aspect to that.
That's a great point. Rubio taught us that.
Yeah.
There's a guy, good guy. I don't know him personally, but I see him in the Senate. And then he made a fool of himself because he descended to Trump's level. My other biggest fear is Gore's disease. I played Bush for Gore in the debate preps, and I saw this coming. The raw, unbridled contempt that Al Gore had for George W. Bush. He didn't believe Bush deserved to even be in the studio with him.
And he transmitted that to everybody in America during the debate, and it cost him.
By the way, he did not have that when he debated Quayle, who he'd served with in the Senate. He did not have that when he debated Jack Kemp in 92 and 96. But he honestly believed that Bush was an idiot. He had no business being there. You can't afford to think that way. I mean, you may hate Trump, Hillary, but 13 million people chose him. And you have got to honor that. And even if he's being a jerk, you cannot show that kind of raw contempt. Because what happens, as you know, the audience thinks, well, she probably has contempt for me.
Yeah.
Right? Gore conveyed that.
We got a little glimpse of that at this finance event where, Streisand gave her a special wink and she started to veer off into a list of everything that's morally wrong with her opponents, the basket of horribles.
Right.
I was expecting the shot about they go to their guns and their Bible, one of the, the president's bon mots of the same type. It's kryptonite. It's terrible. I think one of the things that Clinton folks ought to do is get her out of that world. Mm-hmm. Because all politicians feed off the audience a little bit. And that is not a world that she needs to connect with. It's just like Trump. He won't leave the Republican primary, which is not doing him any good.
That's a great point. We always did debate prep for Clinton somewhere away. He always wanted to be near his daughter, right? His daughter was about 11 or 12. And as much as we could, we'd get him back to Little Rock so he could see his child. But for debate prep, we took him away.
Yeah.
Took him out to Williamsburg, Virginia. We took him somewhere within an hour's drive of the debate site itself and set up camp there for 3, 4, 5 days. Because you don't want to be around the headquarters. You don't want to be around the donors. That's going to be hard for Hillary for a similar reason. She wants to be near those grandbabies.
Right.
And that's good for her soul. But I wouldn't put her in New York. I wouldn't do the preps in Brooklyn. I don't know where they are, but if I were them, I'd go to Orlando, go to Dayton. Go somewhere in the real America.
Yeah, near where they shop at Costco because that's what they can afford because they've been on a wage crunch for 10 years. It's not just a chart, it's people's lives. Well, it's interesting. The other thing I'm very obsessed, and I'll never know. I mean, we'll read books, but they all make it up afterward. I'd love to know what Trump debate prep is like because I have a picture he's on a throne with the meatloaf, barking orders, everybody. Kellyanne kind of lobbing the occasional question. And they never asked me that. Give me another one. Oh my God. Can you imagine?
No, I can't. Hillary is supremely disciplined. And so I know hers will be very disciplined. Her husband was much less disciplined, but our debate preps were very disciplined. They were focused. We meant business. We had podia constructed that looked exactly like
identical. Yep.
And I actually copped to this finally 20 years later on a CNN documentary. So I can tell you, we did the prep at the Williamsburg Inn, which is this beautiful, great lodge, Colonial Williamsburg, beautiful hotel. And we used bar stools because this was a debate, was going to be a town hall, and they were sitting on stools. So we used bar stools from the bar. When debate night came, we stole the bar stools from the hotel, brought them to the studio, swiped the studio's stools, and put ours in there so that even his ass would be comfortable in exactly the chair he'd been practicing in. Maybe that's a little anal, but we really wanted it just right.
I'll tell you, I am obsessed with this in debate prep because most debate prep is pretty badly done. The candidate's in the living room and the staff are at this point hating the candidate because they wouldn't do the pogo stick thing or whatever it was. The candidate's mad at the staff because they sent him on that stupid bus tour with the bad advance and the crowds were small. And the guy from local TV asked him the price of underwear and he didn't know. And those knuckleheads. And why didn't I hire the guys on the other, blah, blah, blah. So the staff sits there and barks hostile questions at the candidate because it's therapy for them. Quote, toughening them up. We're really going to hit them today in debate prep.
Right.
And the candidate's like furious and marches out or is given a binder that's 5 inches thick to read.
Right.
One of the things I used to always do is I find a good litigator or a tax lawyer, not because they're good on their feet, but because they're detail grinders. Beth Myers did this for Mitt Romney in the governor's races.
Right.
And memorize all the stuff the other candidate will say because you can know. Even Trump, you just transcribe everything. There only are 20 questions. Right. You can kind of prepare. So your candidate, be it Hillary or Trump, depending on who you're working with, has heard the answer the other one is going to give. So they're never standing there under the lights being surprised because then their mind is thinking about, oh my God, I'm losing. That's a great answer. I got nothing. Mother, as opposed to, I've heard that 100 times.
I've heard this.
Yeah.
That was my goal as Bush. Now, Bush was enormously disciplined.
Yeah.
Enormously.
To his great credit.
And you say what you will about him, but and so to play him was actually really easy.
Yeah, you knew what he'd say.
Absolutely, because he had message discipline.
Right.
Trump is much more undisciplined, but I memorized first off, Gore had a great staff, and he gave me 3, 4, 5 people who gave me briefing books on everything. And I'm a visual learner, so if I read things, I remember them. And in order, I had every Bush answer. And as I say, he was extraordinarily disciplined. And so I didn't feel like Gore heard anything that he hadn't heard in the prep, with one exception, which is what Trump ought to do. Don't listen, Donald.
I think a podcast will advance for him, so you're probably safe.
One half of one debate back then was foreign policy. That was it. It was pre-9/11. And Bush came up with something. I've never asked like Rove or McKinnon if they planned this or it was just Bush's own innate good sense. When he was asked a question he didn't know the answer to on foreign policy, you know what he said? Clinton's doing a pretty good job of that. Because what's Gore going to do? And Gore had memorized the opposition leader's name in Burkina Faso. Right?
Exactly.
And exactly what, the Court of Criminal Justice in The Hague was saying about him. And he couldn't use it. He couldn't show his superior intellect because if it's like, what's going on in Burkina Faso? Yeah, I think President Clinton's handling that real well.
So here's a debate question for you. All the hype now is going to be about the first debate. It's going to be treated like the Super Bowl.
Right.
Which debate do you think will be more important?
Well, I do think the first. We'll see if he shows up even for the second and third.
Yeah. Oh, he will.
My own conspiracy theory is that the reason they picked a Fox News host to host the third one is to keep Trump in the game.
Yeah, there might be some truth in that, but I always believe it's the second one.
Really?
Yeah, because now the novelty's over.
Right.
You've seen them both do their act. And also, they're both kind of afraid of each other the first time. And somebody will, quote, win or lose. And so then there'll be some adrenaline craze, this is my last chance, maniac at the second one. And they'll both be more ring-wise.
That's a good point. Now, in 2012, Mitt Romney defeated the President of the United States in that first debate.
Absolutely.
Handily. And everybody focused on Obama's subpar performance for Obama. Romney's performance was extraordinary. He took it to, I think, one of the brighter, more able people I've seen in politics. Took it to him and beat his ass. Mm-hmm. Man, that was impressive. But what it did, I've talked to the Obama people. I was doing a super PAC for him then, too, so I couldn't talk to them at the time. But after the election, I know he did this. This is hard to do. He went to his team and he pointed at his chest. He said, "This is on me. I screwed this up. I didn't take your prep seriously." He walked off to go see the Hoover Dam when they were doing prep. Mm-hmm. He said, "I didn't take your prep seriously. I didn't take this guy seriously. And I was not ready. I will be now." And he did much better in the second
one. That really helped him. And Mitt didn't quite know what the next step was.
Oh, interesting.
And also, foreign policy is always harder to debate an incumbent president.
Right.
Could they be like, I'd like to answer your asinine question, but I've got the Joint Chiefs off stage. We got a little problem in China. I need a minute to talk to the aircraft carrier. Now, back to you. What you made Staples a company? There's a certain stature in that thing. The other thing that, again, I'm not voting for, so I'm not really in the Clinton given advice business. And it would be impossible. Well, nothing's impossible, but what they really ought to try to get is Trump alone without an audience, 2 podiums. Because that Naked on the Rock thing would kill him.
I wish to God they would do a debate without an audience. The audience
it would be better for the
thing.
process, too. I'm so
Kennedy
tired of
and
that
Nixon
during
did
the
not
primary.
have an audience.
Right, and guess
they
what
were in the
happened?
old Meet the Press studio.
2 electron microscopes, and you really see. But anyway, that's
I wonder
neither
if,
here nor there.
for reasons I don't understand, there's this self-perpetuating commission that
that appointed itself. Yeah, I don't
and it tells the candidates what to do. I don't get it either. But I really do think the audiences are a detriment. Look, I hosted Crossfire, which was a great show before I got there. And then it was terrible when I was there, in part because of me. But because we had
there
a live
wasn't enough
audience.
Drinking then. I remember the old man that knew. I used to come on a lot. Yeah. When everybody was drunk, it was better.
Well, I fault myself. I played to the audience too much. And it was at George Washington University, so it was a very liberal audience. It was not the best thing for the show to have a ham like me trying to play to the audience. It was a better show before I was on it. But even if I'd been on with no audience, I think it would have been a better show.
Well, I think you and I, in the spirit of bipartisanship, ought to start a new debate commission and take it over in 4 years. There will be no audiences, where we're bringing 3 of the toughest litigators in the country to quiz these guys and make it real again.
And somewhere in the first, say after the first 30 minutes, here's the next question. Vodka, gin, or bourbon? Take one. Right. Seriously, let him have a pop.
Yeah, that would be...
Hillary's a vodka gal. I know that. Oh, Trump doesn't drink. Good for him. Okay,
Yeah,
but
well-
Hillary likes a vodka martini now and then.
You just don't want the famous Florida story of way back when there was a high, I won't name names, but there was a famous Senate race in Florida. And the incumbent had been injured years ago in a TV studio. A light had fallen down and hit this person. So the incumbent was always a little shaky around TV lights. I don't blame, I would be too if somebody had dropped one on me. So the media consultant was very concerned about the debate performance because of that nervous factor. So the media consultant slipped the candidate a Valiant.
Oh my God.
Just one, just enough to kind of take the edge off. Meanwhile, the campaign manager was very worried about the problem and slipped a little sip of vodka and tonic. They didn't talk to each other.
Oh my God.
So we had the famous Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds debate. Yeah, everything but green dragons flying around. It's one of the great stories of, I wasn't there and I wasn't one of the consultants, so I can't tell you it's completely true, but I've heard it credibly sourced. So I would suggest whoever is in charge of doping Donald Trump, coordinate with the other feuding consultants to make sure there's one plan.
Well, you've done this, and it's really, in my public life, in my professional life, probably like the greatest moments have been those last seconds before debate. I traveled with Clinton, and I was like the last guy to talk to.
Yeah, I've been in that. I did that with McCain when you had that last...
We'd sit in a locker room, bounce a basketball back and forth. And I remember Michael Sheehan, our debate coach, is a big reader of mystery novels, and so is Clinton. And they would talk about mystery novels just to like fill the space, right? Then we'd go out. And I remember standing there and seeing Bush across the stage behind his curtain. And we'd done a lot of prep. I said this to him. I said, okay, Governor, we've done a bunch of prep. You're a really good team. You're really prepared for this. But if something pops into your head, say it. You have the best instincts I've ever seen. You trust those instincts and push him out on stage. And he would, I saw him, he'd swell up. And he's like, yeah, I am pretty good at this. I can confront the president of the United States of America. And that's what I want to say to Hillary.
Yeah.
And I'm really worried. It's not what I would say to Trump, frankly. He has bad instincts. So I'm not sure what I would say, but I worry sometimes.
I would say take the other little pills, sir.
But I worry that sometimes some of the folks around her are like, don't strike out, Billy.
Yeah,
it's the worst thing to say when Billy's going.
No, it's all about confidence. They got to feel 10 feet tall. That was Ailes' trick when they brought him into the Reagan stuff. Reagan gave this rambling answer where it was, he was talking about a movie or something, and all the staff turned pale. And Ailes stood up and clapped and said, "Best damn answer I've ever heard. That's why you're president of the United States." Because they've got to go in feeling bulletproof, and then they are. Right. I'll tell you one great last walk debate. I've never told this story before. I'll get in trouble, but. So I was working for McCain on the Straight Talk Express back in 2000, and most fun you'd ever have in a campaign. And so it's New Hampshire, middle of the primary, one of the more early debates. And I'm doing the last walk with John. And down this long hallway, we're coming from opposite ends of a big stage where we'd meet in the middle and then walk into a little area. And then they'd call us up to debate. So 200 feet away, coming directly at us, are Governor at that time Bush and Karen Hughes, who was doing the last walk with him. And Karen, who is a friend of mine and a good person, but is a formidable appearing human being.
I love Karen, yeah.
So we see each other, 250 feet away, so we can't really hear each other. And the governor, now President Bush, is a friendly, gregarious, likable guy. So he's kind of waving, "Hey, John, how you doing?" Smiling at him. And Karen's got her steel warrior face on. And McCain kind of waves back to him. And under his breath to me, he says, "Look, if there's trouble, don't worry about him. It's her. You go low, I go high." He's not the threat. Oh, that was the McCain I loved.
That's amazing.
I'm going to ask you one thing you touched on before. You said you thought the race could go either way, which is exactly what I say to people when I want turnout. But your analyst hat, I'm going to pin you down a little on that. What do you think the real odds are that Donald Trump is sworn in as the next president of the United States?
45%.
Wow, you're a lot higher than I am. I'm still a best case 1 out of 5.
I'm really only 20%.
Yeah, I think he runs out of oxygen, and I think he's going to have the worst October of anybody. We're not going to elect an insane lunatic who cannot get all the Republicans, let alone any college-educated white people.
Part of my problem is I am so emotionally invested in Hillary. When I worked for President Obama and his super PAC, I love the guy, but it's not the same. Okay, Hillary's been my friend for 25 years. She was the first person to call my wife when our firstborn was born in the middle of a campaign. And
why don't we, I don't want to interrupt, but why don't we ever see that Hillary? Because all the staff people who've worked for her love her.
Right. I would walk over hot coals for her.
Not always true of him, by the way. He's a little pricklier. People, he's got...
I know, but I'm so much even closer to him.
She is beloved by people who've worked for her.
But so I think because I'm so emotionally invested, it's harder for me to be completely clear-eyed. I'm being paid to be an analyst for CNN and also to be an advocate at this PAC. But when I was working for the Obama super PAC, there was no emotional investment. I cared. I love my country. I love my president. But it's not the same. It wasn't my guy.
Yeah, it wasn't blood.
And so, you know what? I was never in doubt. And it was just as close a race. The polling was 2-3 points. But I could see more clearly then that the demography was irresistible for Obama. Now, what we don't know, and we won't know until November 8th, is can she replicate that Obama coalition and add some Hillary coalition types in there? She's going to do better with college-educated white women than Obama did. She's got her own gloss, but the fundamental structure of her demographics is the same as Obama's. And I knew Obama could do it. He did it once. I knew he could do it again. And so you just don't know until you run the race.
I think part of it, and I'll say this as somebody who's not as affectionate, my mom loved her though. It is a testament to the worry Democrats have, not so much about her experience and skill level as president, but her candidate skills, that they just kind of discount her when the demographics she's working with are actually better than the Obama ones.
That's right.
Because the country has moved more in that direction. My view is if the Democrats can't beat a fraud like Trump, it's time to chapter the party and start again.
Well,
because that is, that's a blot on our history if that guy can't be beaten by a flawed but still credible candidate.
But you know what? I'm haunted by the words of late Pat Moynihan, who in 1988 looked at Vice President Bush running for president and said, if we can't beat this guy, we got to find another country to run in. And we lost in a landslide.
Yeah, but
thanks, Pat.
Donald Trump is no George H.W. Bush, no George W. Bush, Jeb Bush, I'd say, and Ronald Reagan.
That's right.
He's a fraud. Well, what are we selling here? We got anything going on? Any books that are out now?
No, I'm temporarily, I think, out of the book business. One day I will come back to you because I have tons of research actually on Ronald Reagan.
You're doing the Super PAC, though. What's
doing
it
the
called?
Super PAC. It's called Priorities USA. Our current ad features President Reagan, one of his great speeches about unifying America, and then intercut with Donald Trump, who is no Ronald Reagan.
I set you up for that. That was
custom
too easy.
made for your audience.
Too easy. And you're on the CNN. Are you on the Twitter for the kids?
I am at Paul Begala on the Twitter. And I like hostile comments. I like to retweet the haters, as long as it's vulgar and not racist.
We're doing a thing now. We haven't launched it really yet. We did it once, that test. We don't have it right yet. We have a special jingle for angry tweets. Why can't they learn to spell? So we'll be gathering up a bunch of them, and they'll be here on Radio Free GOP. Paul Begala, thank you very much, my friend. We disagree on every candidate, but you're a professional, and it was great to talk to you.
Thanks, Murph. I have tremendous respect for you.
It's number one for rumors and fun. It's Resistance Podcasting, Radio Free GOP.
Okay, that's our podcast. Thank you for listening to Radio Free GOP. We appreciate it. The Republican resistance is growing. So a salute to you Republican resistors out there on the Kasich front in Ohio, with the Ben Sass Rangers in Nebraska, the Carlos Curbelo brigades in Miami, all across the country, Republicans who know country first. I hear it. There they are. They're going to try to scoop us up. That last bit made them mad, but you guys are everywhere. I get emails all the time, even deep within the party committees. Don't worry, the Republican Party will live to fight again and fight for a cause we can believe in. And so, until our next broadcast from a new undisclosed location, remember, victory will be ours.
Radio Free GOP, the resistance sound all can be known.
This has been Radio Free GOP, the voice of the Republican resistance, with your host, Mike Murphy.